Welcome back. We are moving into our third conversation here on Open Your Eyes, and it's a very important one at that. Of course, we have been speaking about quite some time the adaptation of the UN Convention Against Corruption. And here with us, we have two representatives who are a part of the committee working to implement certain aspects of the UNCAC. And they're fresh back from a special exchange in Jamaica where they went to see the practices there. So here with us on set, representing the Chamber of Commerce, we have Giacomo Sanchez, and Director of the Financial Intelligence Unit, we have Clare. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Well,
good to be here.
Good to be back.
Yeah.
So, of course, the convention, and we're actually approaching the first anniversary, so this is a great time to have the conversation.
Of course.
Is one that we know there was a substantial amount of push from stakeholders to get government to sign on to, and we did so last December, and there has been quite a bit of work happening, we're told, behind the scenes in getting to the point of rolling out some of the aspects. So my first question has to do with how this committee that you're a part of was formulated and what your specific mandate is.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's the implementation board, and,
Yes.
and we have very viable representation because it's made up of public and private sector actors and civil society persons as well. So you have in addition to the chamber, you have the unions represented there, the Council of Churches, NGOs, and even there's a youth organization that's represented as well.
And the opposition.
And the opposition. So these persons were determined way back, I think, around February or so, as being the coordinating or the project board. And what happens afterwards is it basically simply makes decisions based on what is presented in front of it. You have option A, you have option B. That's what we do. That's what the board does.
Yeah.
But I have to mention that there are other persons not a part of the board who are very important in the process. Yes.
Yeah.
So, for example, the director of the public prosecutions and the Auditor General, they are not a part of the board, but they are very much involved in the process.
How does the implementation board work along with the Attorney General Ministry?
The Attorney General Ministry is designated as the focal point because according to the tenets of the convention, since we acceded, that is one of the mandate that Belize had to have occur. Mm-hmm. Having done that, the Attorney General Ministry and the Attorney General himself, as the focal point, sort of chairs the board, project board. Mm-hmm. And we simply go through the series of implementation steps that we need to. And so over the past few months, there's parallel processes at work, whereby there's a technical component to it, and of course there's more of a social / advocacy type of work. Right. Our trip to Jamaica was more on the sort of the it could be both considered both technical and of course sort of invitation to the technical areas too.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Now, it's been a bit over 6 months since the establishment of the implementation board. Tell me some of the work that has been done over that time.
Well, I could say, first of all, we had to get funding. This, is a very, very ambitious project, and we are very, very thankful to UNDP. That's been one of the more very active units that have come aboard to fund, alongside with one of their partners that is called UNODC, United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. Since then, the U.S. Embassy itself has provided some funding to take us, I think, into maybe the middle of next year. Mm-hmm. So a lot of it has to do with, for example, determining these terms of references. We're going to hire somebody, for example, to the advocacy and so on. What is the competence? Those are the types of things that the board has discussed. And of course, looking at this, what we call the South Exchange,
Yeah.
the overseas visit to a jurisdiction who has implemented, as Kimo said. That's one of the things that we have looked at.
Now, you had the opportunity to travel to Jamaica to kind of see what has been their processes established there since the adaptation of the UNCAC. Tell us a bit about what you saw on this particular exchange.
Okay, so in my instance, I was paired with the civil society grouping, if you will. So we have the chamber representation there, the opposition, and of course the network of NGOs. We visited the National Integrity Action, their Integrity Commission, and the Electoral Commission. Of course, in the first meeting we had with the Integrity Commission of Jamaica, it was sort of insightful to note that the distinction between how their system works versus ours. And just to make a quick note, it's just the makeup of their commission, unlike in Belize where your ruling government party essentially selects the commissioners, while there has to be concurrence between the Governor General does the selection, and both parties, the incumbent and of course the opposition, has to have concurrence.
They have to agree to who will be on the commission.
And if there's no agreement, then they have to go to a sort of a second cycle of nomination, so to speak.
Yeah. Now, looking at the processes, before we move into who we visited, Ken, how much of it has been a shift within their own system under the UNCAC?
For them, it's been a growing, it's been progressive and it's been over time, because some of their governance institution has been in a place for some time.
Yeah.
As a result, I mean, they have quite a track record and a lot of people movement in terms of augmenting and pushing for change. And so slowly over the past, I'd say 25, 30 years, a lot of their institutions, they have been in place, and they've come to that level of maturity now that they're trying to integrate some of them that they believed are duplicating their efforts. So in case of the Integrity Commission, for them, that covers just parliamentarians. And so the 60 odd or so parliamentarians in their system has to report, and there are certain reporting guidelines. And then they have also an agency that does the same work, but for the remainder of the public sector, which amounts to, in their instance, about 26,000 people or more, that has to file annual declarations, and so it goes through the whole 9 years of their process.
Right.
And the visits, you mean?
Well, I was paired with the Auditor General, Ms. Bradley, and so we went to 3 locations. First to a unit that's called Revenue Protection Division, kind of unique. Although we had something like this in Belize some years ago.
Right.
And basically what they do, they are an institution outside of the revenue departments where they listen for any kind of noise coming from these places, any hint of corruption. They actively...
Which places? Financial institutions?
You're looking at government revenue departments.
Okay. Yeah.
So your customs, tax administration, Jamaica, and so on. And anybody along the chain is allowed to make a direct report to revenue protection. You don't have to go through your boss to make a report that something is amiss. And they will tell you, they have very impressive statistics in terms of the convictions that they have gotten. And you would be amazed at the types of crimes that people commit and might be overlooked. So we had a very, very useful discussion with them. We also went to their Auditor General's office, which I think very, very impressive as well. Ms. Bradley had a report that detailed some of the things that we might want to implement coming out of that. And of course, I went to our counterparts there. They have their version of the FIU. There's something that I wanted to, like what Kimo was saying earlier. Now, in Jamaica, they were very, very professional persons and very accommodating, because we were supposed to go from early September, but because of hurricane, it was at Iris, we had to postpone. But even though they implemented this thing from 2007, do you know that Jamaica has slipped in the perception of corruption by Transparency International. So I'm saying you can be doing very good work, but you have to advocate, you have to let people out there know what you're doing, because the perception might be different from the
That's
reality.
interesting.
Yeah.
But, no, but wouldn't it also be, I think of it, and if I can liken it to a health issue, when there are sometimes increased cases in HIV, it's attributed to more persons knowing what some of the symptoms are and checking their status. So if I have more reports of corrupt practices coming in, I may seem to be more of a corrupt country, but it could have been that before I just ignored it.
That's a perspective. That's interesting.
Yeah. I'm only saying because it is interesting.
Right.
You know, I told you during the break, and I think it's a crucial conversation to have. When we signed on to the UNCAC, I think people are very hopeful of what this can mean in terms of the type of governance that we have in this country. And for quite some time, we've been saying, you know, this is going to be a long process. There's going to be quite a number of changes. It's going to take buy-in from many different sectors to be able to get us to a point where we feel that issues of corruption will be flagged and addressed.
Right.
How do you explain to the public what this process entails, what the involvement of all the different sectors will be, and when you think that we will be able to see some of the changes that will allow for a more transparent and accountable system in the country?
Yeah, okay, maybe we could look at where we were, say late September. As a focal point, the Attorney General Ministry had to make the submission on Belize's behalf to the UN Secretariat regarding our what we do is a self-review gap analysis.
Right.
And we're looking at our legislation compared to what is called for by the UNCAC Convention, and that is submitted to the UN Secretariat. That takes a couple months for them to review, and in our case, there's two countries that are reviewing what it is that was submitted. So you have Tuvalu from the international grouping, and Haiti from our region here. And so they have their respective experts reviewing this. By the end of December, that process should be completed. In January, thereabouts, we should, I think, we should be having them coming down, because we opted to invite them for a field visit, so to speak. And so they'll be coming and meeting with our key experts in Belize, primarily from public sector and the judiciary, etc. Thereafter, by the end of, say, March of 2018, we should be getting our first executive summary based on from the review mechanism. Not until then will I anticipate that then the government will then have to start implementing the hard changes, and so that's where the rubber hits the road. In terms of our legislative agenda, because yes, we have the FIU as an institution, we have the DPP as an office as another institution, but by and large,
Accounts, Integrity Commission,
exactly,
Auditor General.
But as was mentioned by a politician in the region on Last Night News, unless the legislation has teeth, then, and that is where in Belize we may be lacking. And I think with reference to the actual tenets of the UN Convention, once those are in place, I think we should be getting at a better place from a legislative standpoint.
And I just want to take it back a little bit. We often use the word corruption very loosely. So I'd just like for you to explain what you're referring to when you say corruption.
Well, interesting. This convention is not like other international agreements which we may simply just ratify in law. What it is, it's basically a list of recommendations. The country should have this in place, and they go through a number of things. Generally, people think of corruption in terms of people who are kleptocrats, stealing the public money. But if you look at the convention, it looks to create a society where across the board there is consistency when it comes to fair dealings and so on. So there is a lot of representation in there about private sector corruption. And it's not simply private sector dealing with government, but private sector dealing with private sector. There is a requirement. I'll give you an example. Let's say the store, the manager of a warehouse, say at Belize, he under invoices or receives payment that he doesn't pay in from somebody who from a firm out there. Generally, in the past, you would never hear of that kind of corruption coming to court or being charged and so on.
Yeah.
That would be subject to civil remedies. This convention requires that there be laws in place where a person can be criminally charged for something like that. So, in defining corruption, basically it's looking at fair, transparent, economic value transactions where there is no kind of bribery for services, because the conclusion is all of this bribery, basically there's a common man on the street who has to pay for it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
right.
And it causes the greater disadvantage for people who aren't in a position
Right.
to offer kickbacks or whatever it is.
Right.
Now, and that brings us to Giacomo, obviously, as a member of the Chamber of Commerce. You know, while we know, and I've asked your president and the business senator before, and I do want your response since you're deeply involved in this process. We know that quite a number of the corrupt issues that we see cannot take place with just government representatives alone. There is an involvement of the private sector. Talk to us about how this role that you play with the implementation board, how you take it back into the private sector to be able to ensure that if we're going to continue demanding for anti-corruption practices, we have to get our house in order too.
Yeah. Well, a little easier said than done.
I am very sure.
Because, it, like you said, it takes
Yeah.
two to tango. But nonetheless, with the implementation of the UNCAC, it is looking at our public space, or public administration.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, how is the citizenry tax dollars spent?
No.
And so we need to, I think if once we get to where the convention wants us to go in terms of what it is that would be more of a preventative measure on the public sector end, I think private sector has to fall in place. There'll be no easy road, because there'll be sufficient check and balances within the legislation that even the private sector actors will have to then be culpable to. So,
Yeah. It's interesting.
I mean, that's just a short answer.
Yeah, that will. Yeah, we don't have all day for that one, but I wanted to tie in an experience. You know, when you talk about legislative changes and having teeth, I think, you know, while we can clearly say some of our laws are so outdated, there are some great mechanisms within this country that just aren't allowed to be used the way they should. I'll give the exercise. Giacomo, we were a part of the sensitization process for the UNCAC, and we carried out an exercise showing how you can ensure that you get value for your money on contracts. And let's say it was a construction contract. And one of the things that became so clear is that there are all the mechanisms in place, the tendering process, the bidding process, the conditional disbursement of funds dependent on deliveries. All of these things, and the contractor general who is supposed to be keeping these processes in place. So my question is, if some of the recommendations from UNCAC are already in place in this country, like the establishment of an integrity commission, but perhaps not with the best composition we can have, how do we move from taking the paper document into something that is more tangible to produce results that are more or less corrupt? Let's say it that way.
I'll take a shot first.
Please.
I'll give you my
I know, this is like wishful thinking.
No, I actually don't. I think this same conversation is being had on other platforms, where, and I will tell you as somebody who has been senior public servant, a lot of this rests on the backs of persons who lead these particular efforts you're talking about, whether it's FIU, or the contractor general, or the auditor general, or whoever. I think one thing with this UNCAC, it brings all of these persons together, and you have to start having a conversation. There's a lot we count in terms of what has been achieved and what has been proactively done. We never count what has been ceded because we took no action. And even on the, like for example, when it comes to anti-money laundering, one of the things that Belize is being assessed is internal cooperation, domestic cooperation. You have to measure that by the way how the DPP actively cooperates with the director of the FIU and the controller of customs and the commissioner of income tax. And no politician needs to tell you to do your job. So I'm saying, I don't think that it was necessarily some person saying, I don't want to cooperate with you. But now with these discussions being held, you're now realizing, my God, why didn't I sit down and talk with you before? Because while you might have had this issue, getting this done, we could have achieved this under perhaps my particular rules or the laws that apply to the FIU. So I think going forward, I don't think it's an impossible task.
Yeah.
I think that there are definitely some things to be achieved.
Yeah. And specifically, what needs to be recognized is that our system is almost self-regulating. So we have someone signing off on a contract, as you pointed out, but then there's no mechanism in place to do an independent review. Therefore, I think more and more we are on board with the UNCAP. It will help to create certain insulation of certain key ministries, departments, or offices where I think that is what is needed, particularly in our system.
Yeah.
There's not sufficiency of check and balances, and that is where I think we're failing as a country in terms of at least improving our perception of our level of corruption in Belize.
Yeah.
There's a very clear need for a public sensitization as to our roles. Whether I am a regular Jane or Joe public, or perhaps I work in government service, I'm a public service officer.
Right.
Why is it, how are we aiming to be able to get that information out there about how everybody has a part to play, whether in flagging it, if we ever have a revenue protection, what is it? Agent?
Yeah.
Sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
That
Well,
I would be able
yeah.
to go in and say, well, I saw X, Y, and with my evidence, of course, take place, and know that I have done my part in trying to mitigate the corruption that I see.
Well, not so much speaking to that level of detail, but more so, at least from the project board level, where we're moving towards the implementation. I think a major component of what we're doing, there's a great push by the UNDP for this advocacy component of what we're doing. So, which means we're going from north to south, east to west of the country, trying to get the word out, educate people, so that they can identify. First of all, I mean, people just need to understand what it is the whole United Nations Convention is about. Once they get an appreciation, then I think that will help change the tide.
Yeah.
But it has to be a continuous process, and so at least for the next year or two, we'll be seeing quite a bit of that.
Yeah.
I think we started off with schools, and the 1 year anniversary in December we'll have anti-corruption week.
Week
And
leading
so
up to.
right now there are jingles and so on. But what I would encourage you to do is after this trip, because we worked hard on this trip, but we were fully satisfied. I mean that we did a lot. All of us were required to do reports, and it's going to be consolidated with recommendations for things that should be implemented.
Yeah.
And I would advise the media at the appropriate time to ask for a summary of those recommendations coming from those persons who were in that exchange.
Yeah. So you're saying I can't ask for it now, right? That's
But still, yeah.
But how much, from your experience, I mean, you get to see the agencies as they've been set up, but you also got to interact with the people who are working in the system. What are some of the paradigm shifts that have to take place within a society for the relevant agencies to work? What has been their experience in
One
Jamaica?
of the key issues coming out of a look at the Integrity Commission there and their Electoral Commission, they enjoy what you'd consider some level of autonomy. So there's no direct political involvement.
Right.
And I think when we reach a stage in our country, I think we will be at a better place, because then the actual system can then function, and then people will be really answerable then. It doesn't matter what side of the political divide you are.
Yeah.
Right. I in my case, I saw one of the things that we took away was this security of tenure. Like this lady who heads this Revenue Protection Division, she was a retired major from the Army. She was like from their defense force, she has survived 3 administrations. And she says, well, obviously I must be doing a good job. But that sort of thing where you have continuity in that's where you start to get the buy-in.
Yeah. And from your experience, were there any, I mean, you're going to be making recommendations, so it seems that there are some things that you have identified that are implementable sooner rather than later. While you haven't put together the final report yet, perhaps you can share some of your personal insights in terms of what you think can be tweaked here in Belize within the near future to enhance the systems that we do have.
Well, for instance, I mean, the way we, the selection process in terms of commissioners for Integrity Commission, that's an easy fix, but that will be a...
But that's political will.
Yeah, that will be a serious political push. The electoral, right now...
Let's not dismiss that so easily. So one more time, let's make this as simple to people. So the Integrity Commission is set up in Jamaica, is officially appointed by the Governor General.
Correct.
But your government and your opposition must agree on the individuals.
Exactly.
In other words, they're not appointed by government officials.
No.
And it means that that person there has to have some kind of, what should I say, non-alignment if both parties agree. And what happens if they can't agree on a person?
Then they go to a second round of selection.
Okay.
So until they reach a common ground.
Yeah. Okay. So I like that recommendation.
And how far are we in the process? I mean, we've just begun. That's the truth.
Yeah.
And you know, looking at it, and even personally, when I was first introduced to the information, I was like, okay, good. Well, things are going to get moving now. No more corruption. You know. But how long is this going to take, or is it just a continuous process where you're constantly, revisiting these?
If you look back at the timeline that I measured earlier, sometime after March of next year, after we've gotten our executive summary from the Secretariat, that will then inform legislators. Okay, these are the specific areas that we need to start attacking, and then, I mean, also from the board and of course from civil society, I think the push also has to come from. Yeah. But as where we are today, we need to also be informing the public what it is that their responsibilities are and their awareness of the whole subject matter, so that they can help create that push. Otherwise, we won't be creating any momentum.
Yeah.
Right.
Yo, I don't want to lose the opportunity to hear your immediate recommendation.
Well, quite a few, but I think one of the things would have been certainly deal with low-hanging fruit. There are opportunities right now, even before the law is changed, for you to do stuff that basically allows people to understand that this that you might think is innocuous, this is really dangerous. The FIU, I think, this week will be sending out an advisory that we had sent to Central Bank. Has to do with persons. One of the things that we see at typology is persons who are forging documents to make applications for bank loans and that sort of thing. Though you might say, well, that's not a big, it really is a big deal. And it's the numbers that we have seen tells us that it's something that's, it's more than just another occasion here and there. So simple things like that where you can start to let people be aware that this is corrupt and this defrauds somebody. Persons who get into understandings to approve a loan for you and then you know that the loan is not viable and so on. That's corrupt. It's something that starts really, you need to clean up home first before you can start looking at other people. These are the sort of things I think that we can, and secondly, cooperating domestically. Find out why it is that I am not speaking to you. Why is it, as a director of the DPP, I might not be speaking to the Commissioner of Tax about prosecutions and so on. There are opportunities. Yeah.
Okay. And since the South exchange, you mentioned that the representatives are going to come here as well?
No, that is coming out of the review mechanism.
Okay.
So the experts, one from Tuvalu, one from Haiti, they'll be coming down sometime in January, I imagine, to actually meet with our on-the-ground experts, like the DPP office, Contractor General, and the whole 9 yards. I think 15 individuals had to be identified and we're meeting with them, sitting down and going over what was submitted back in September.
Right.
Thereafter, they will come up with their final recommendation and they will do a comprehensive report. That each country has the option of whether they're disclosing that to the public or not. But the executive summary is published, so at least we'll have something to look at.
Yeah. Now, what do you say to the public? Ultimately, the accountability is for government officials and the Attorney General as the ministry in charge. But since you've been tasked with the implementation portion, what do you say to our viewers at this time who will tune into the Senate Special Select Investigation in a few hours, hear things that they know, maybe they don't have the proper wording for it, but they just know it's wrong?
Yeah.
What do you say about how optimistic you are in the adaptation of UNCAC for a less corrupt system?
It will happen this year. It will happen next year. It will be an enduring process because, we're talking about legislative changes, and these changes are put forward in front of the parliamentarians who are the ones essentially would be regulating themselves. So that is where a great deal of understanding on the public's part as to what they can do and how what momentum they can create in terms of change whenever there's legislative matters coming forth, going to the House for any type of changes. I think that is where if we make enough noise that we can get the change that we need.
Yeah.
I agree. I think that this lies with persons to you take what is available to you. I think this is the kind of thing under the Freedom of Information Act. If somebody says, I don't want to give you that, then they have to defend why they don't want to supply that information because it is exempt from A, B, C, D, E. But this is something that is there for you. And I would only say to you that please understand that even bigger players than ourselves have had difficulty. I saw a conviction last week, 2 weeks ago, a guy from Equatorial Guinea defrauded his country. He was the Prime Minister's son. 150 million euros. And the case, he was found guilty in France 2 weeks ago. But do you know how this happened? The charges were laid 10 years ago. And Transparency International created a crowdfunding effort to get witnesses to go to France to testify.
Wow.
So, but this is grassroots. This is people coming forward and saying, we will stay with this.
Yeah.
No, the difficulty is there's a judgment. What Kimo said, there are issues with the legislation. Now, France has the money. They can't send it back to Guinea. So it's a process that we want to make sure that we just don't put people in jail as you would want, but we actually have the monies repatriated to the persons who it belongs to.
Yeah,
So that's what we're looking at.
And the UNCAC does allow for recovery of funds as well.
Asset recovery is a big thing with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else you'd like to tell the public before we wrap up this conversation about the rolling out of UNCAC, and especially as we head into that 1-year anniversary?
Well, look forward to a series of events occurring. We're in the schools already. The UN has provided their experts coming to Belize, and so they're going into schools and doing a series for the remainder of this month. And there's a calendar of events for the first week of December leading up to the 9th.
Okay.
And so all that will be publicized, of course.
Okay.
Yeah, and I encourage everybody else, your unions, the churches, ask your representatives, have a presentation being made on this. Wherever you are, whatever your constituency, have somebody come and make a presentation.
And who do you contact for that presentation?
So there are members of the board, but all of these agencies have a representation. So Mr. Hubert Enriquez, for example, he's representing the what is it? The unions. Trade Union Congress. But Senator Salas, who was on the trip, he represents a network of NGOs, and there's a gentleman from the Salvation Army. He was representing the churches. I think everybody is covered in this effort.
Yeah.
So you can.
Because the convention requires that there's inclusivity of not only the public sector but also of civil society actors, and so as many organizations as that can be on board as possible, so that we can get the word out.
Yeah.
Right.
That's important.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming in and sharing an update as to the work you've been doing.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very
All
much.
right. We're going to go ahead and take our final break, and when we come back, we'll have our wrap up. So stay tuned.